Hi everyone, it's Elise from Kit and Clouder Online Colouring Classes and welcome to our February 2025 colouring class for markers. In this class, I'm going to be taking you through how to colour this beautiful peony flower to get that soft pink glow. We've got our leaves and our wood slice as well. Now when we do a class, it's very tempting to look at the finished image and think of that as being the end result. But creating a finished project is not truly the reason behind doing your lessons. Firstly, we do a class to take a break for self-care. The process is so much more important than completion. It's great if you want to use your projects for birthdays, gifts, or design teams, but it shouldn't be the underlying reason for doing your project or your hobbies. When we have end goals like this, it can add pressure and take away from the mindfulness and stress relief that creating brings us. So make sure that you're aware of this as you create today. Another reason for taking a class is to learn new skills and improve your technique. The best way to improve is to try all different topics, techniques, styles, blends, and art fundamentals. If we learn just one new thing here today or refine one skill we already have, then we've grown and improved. So make sure that you always look at challenging yourself and trying things outside of your usual go-to. These are the times we grow the most, even if we don't plan to colour that topic again outside of class. When we stick to our regular comfort images, we aren't gaining new foundations which help us level up. Also, it's really important not to judge a book by its cover. A class can look difficult, but the majority of people tell me their favourite lessons are the topics and images they never would have picked themselves. So be brave and always try something new. You are here because you want to grow, and this is how we best achieve that. Now, if you get stuck on any aspect here today, our classes always come with free private one-on-one tutoring with myself. So don't ever place anything in the too hard basket or think you'll just come back later. Use the assistance that's freely provided to help you feel confident learning and adapting the new skills that you're taking away. I'm here to help with technology, confidence jumping in, and any tips to help you in your journey. Don't ever feel like it's embarrassing or too much effort. I've seen and made every mistake over the years doing this, and it's my pleasure to help. It's important that we have these chats at the start of our videos just to remind you of our intent today behind creating. So I know it can be a bit boring to listen to me chatting or tempting to skip, but please do take note of these things every month to help you get the most from your experience. So let's start chatting about the colouring. Now, one of the most important art fundamentals we need to touch on today is called light source. I place this at the start of every video so you can refer back to this when you colour your own images after class. We only learn these techniques through repetition, so feel free to put this part of the video on again to remind you of the steps, as it's the most important thing you can learn in relation to your colouring. Without light, we cannot see, so an understanding of light source helps us with where our shading goes on the page. Now, we typically work with what's called ambient lighting in our classes. Ambient lighting is a major source of light in the scene, like the sun or overhead lights in a ceiling that cast big cones of light over the entire piece rather than coming from one side. The way that we approach this is that any part of our scene or object that's popping up toward us, we imagine the light rays coming down and hitting this part of the object first, making them appear lighter and brighter. This is called a highlight. Now, the parts of the objects that are further back, slanting, or curving away from the light get hit by the light rays last, so are darker. We call these our shadows. Now, in between highlight and shadow, we have what's called the midtone of the object. And midtone is generally considered the true colour of an object as it's not affected by light or shade. This is a great way to actually make your colour blends. You can pick out your midtone colour and then pick a darker colour for shadow and a lighter colour for highlight. Now, one of the most important light source concepts that we also need to look at is called cast shadow. Now, it's the part that's most often left out but creates the most depth. A cast shadow is created when we have something in front or above something else. Notice the shadow on my hand that it's cast by the duster above. The closer these objects are together, the darker and harder that shadow is. And then as I lift it up, notice the softer and more dispersed that shadow becomes. So this is helping to show the levels and distance between our objects in the scene. Now before we get started, I'm just going to run you through a blending basics tutorial just to help you with all of those foundations before we jump into our final image here. This is great if you're starting out with coloring or if you're new to this medium. Even if you have watched this part of the video before, I still recommend to watch again just for some tips on the control of using your medium. Okay, now with markers, I'm using my Copics here today. Now it's important when using alcohol markers that you use a good bleed-proof cardstock. Now I'm using Express-It blending card. There are a few other types available as well, which you can find on the website, kitandclowder.com. Click FAQs, then Colouring FAQs, then you'll see the papers section with suggestions there. Now the reason why we use a bleed-proof cardstock is it allows the ink to sit on the surface of the paper for longer rather than seeping through those fibers of the paper. This is what allows us to blend the colours together and allows us to work them a bit more. The reason why I like the Express-It is I find it tends to hold more layers of ink for longer, allowing the ink to sort of sit on the surface for a bit longer. Now, if you're brand new to using markers, what I would suggest, if you have difficulty with any of the strokes here today, that you pop onto our website, again, kitandclowder.com, click Classrooms at the top of the page, and then scroll down to the free Markers 101 class. Now, this class runs through all of your marker fundamentals. Okay, so you can use any colors at all if you like. If you're going to color along with me, I'm just using my B12, 14 and 16, so a good blend to show highlight, midtone and shadow. Now when we do a coloring with our markers, the main stroke that we're going to use is feathering. So I don't really use circle blending in our classes, and that's because if you've learnt circle blending before, what happens is if you've got your dark, middle and light colors and you're circling, you can actually muddy everything up. So when we work with light source, I tend to use more feathering method. Now feathering is when we'll come parallel with the page. Now I'm holding the marker like I just would normal writing, so it's a little bit on its side rather than straight up and down. Now you may notice I'm holding the marker so it rests on my second last finger. A lot of people color with it on the last one, and when you color on the last one, what you'll notice here is I'm very close to the page. So as soon as I put my hand down, I'm sort of hitting the page already, whereas if I've got it on my second one here, when I come down to place the marker, I've got a bit more of a gap. My marker's sitting high from the page and I have a bit more control. Now if you usually color like this, you may find that it just takes a little bit of practice to get comfortable in this one. You may find it doesn't work for you at all, and that's okay, but I have had a lot of feedback that it's helped with fine lines. So have a practice today, see how you go, and maybe something that helps. So when we do the feathering, we're going to come parallel with the page and we lift our wrist at the end of the stroke, and that gives me a nice fine finish to help with blending. I want to use the side of the marker so I get nice big broad coverage, and you can see I'm overlapping so I get again that broad coverage there. I'm trying not to have much individual stroke like this showing at the end. So you can see here I've got pretty good coverage and just lifting as I finish up. Then I grab my next lightest color, so this is B14 for me, and I start just back of where I've ended with that color. And then I just do the same thing. So I feather straight over the top and extend further out. And I keep going until I can't see the line between the colors any further. Now I can see, however, the line of where I started this color. So once I've finished this, I just go back real quick. One layer should get rid of that line. So the idea with markers is that you keep blending until the lines disappear, and that's what your bleed-proof cardstock helps with. So next color, B12, same thing, you just start back a little bit, building up, and remember, use the side of that marker, nice big broad strokes. Keep going until that line disappears. When it does, if you can see where you started the color, just go back one nice stroke over the top until you're happy with the blend through. And that's all there is to it. So you want to make sure we're not getting these little stubby sort of strokes here. If you are, use a bit more the side. And try and work quickly. I find when we work quickly and we're a little bit more carefree, it's a lot easier to blend with the markers. We're not as heavy-handed. We don't need to think it through every little step so much to get a nice finish. Okay, so we're going to get started here today on coloring up our peony flower. Now, while doing this tutorial, I really recommend that you watch the start of this video where I go through all the art foundations and break down the why behind our coloring here. I know that listening to the chat can sometimes feel a little bit boring. We just all want to get to the coloring. But this is the most important part of the tutorials, learning and understanding why we're doing what we're doing with our coloring. This is what you're going to take away and apply to all different images after your class lesson to really grow those skills. And even if you don't love florals, this is such an important lesson as well, because learning all these art foundations on all different topics really helps you to enhance your coloring skills. Now with our peony here today, I wanted to create that really pretty bright glow of pink toward the center of the flower. And then as you extend out, our petal edges are all this really soft, light pink. Now before we start coloring our peony flower, let's chat about some of the art foundations and theories that we'll use for coloring it up here today. I know that listening to the chat can sometimes feel a little bit boring. We're all so excited to jump in with the coloring, but the most important part of your lesson is these art foundations, because they're what's going to help you grow and apply these techniques to other images after class as well. So this is really the most important part of your class lesson. Now, in terms of color here today for our peony, there's so many different variations that we can take, but the one that I wanted to use here today is giving us a soft glow on our petals. You can see it's a really nice bright pink toward the center of each petal, and then it gets out almost to a brighter white along the edges. So the peony comes in a big variety of colors, and you can absolutely use any color blend that you like when creating this. But this is a really complicated blend, and it looks very simple, but it's actually quite difficult to do. So I wanted to give you this one to experiment here with today, because we've done all different florals in class previously, but we haven't done anything as soft as this one. So it's really quite a challenge to keep the blend this soft, but still retain all of that detail and realism. So the way that we do this is we use our color to help us achieve this. And we use all those light source foundations at the start of the video to help us create that depth. So when we have a flower like this, we always want to be thinking of what petals are sitting in front, which are behind, where is that shadow color going to be placed. So if we think of it in terms of everything emanates back from your center point, that's the easiest way to approach this. And the petals that are toward the middle here, these are all on top. And then each layer of petals is underneath. So remember that when we have something on top and something under, the one on top is going to cast a shadow back. So these petals here being our top level, you're going to get a nice big cast shadow on each layer around. And you can see that darker color through there as well. Now that is not just our cast shadow, but also our pop of pink color there. So this type of colorway in the peony flower is always going to be brightest toward that center, which just happens to coincide with that cast shadow. So it's going to work out a little bit easier in that respect. We want to think about the movement of the petals. So we want to think about any of the petals curving back. So curving back in on themselves like this. When this happens, we want to think about the petal being split into two, with a lower layer and that raised upper which is curving back. And we get the cast shadow underneath that raised upper. So you can see on a petal like this one here, we've got that curl on that edge. So we get the cast shadow inside and underneath that curl. Same over here, we've got that curl on the side edge, so we get our darker color in and underneath that one as well. And the whole way around on each of these petals. Some of these ones facing toward us are curving up and then back as well. And you'll notice that I get darker in toward that center edge there again. So I'm always thinking about where this petal is connecting into the center point, and that's where that darker color is really coming through. We don't want to neglect the opposite side of the petal though, and you'll notice that I still have detail here, but it's just soft. So if you're going to do this color blend, and say you want to do, instead of pink, maybe you want to do a purple, or maybe you want to do an orange. What we want is this color on the opposite edge to be so super light and soft that it's almost fading out to the white of the paper, but we get that hint of detail coming through. Wherever you place color on this, it's going to indicate like a little bit of a crease or a little part where your light is being blocked. So we want to think about anywhere that we want to show movement, we're going to bring color through. The way that we keep this lighter is your main highlight and your edges stay the white of the paper. So overall, the most color that is used is actually no color. It's the white of that paper there. And all of our color is going into the shadow areas, into your creases, into your cast shadows. And that's what's creating our levels for us. Now the little flower center there, we've got a little pop of yellow, and we bring our green in as well. It does get very dark in and around those little pops there, which helps to show that these are all sitting on top of that flower petal base. All right, so let's go ahead and color this up. I've got my image here ready to go, and you'll notice that it's in the no lines version of the image. So no lines is just the light gray versus the black outline. Now, whenever I color something and want it to look realistic, I'll always use this light gray version, because if you look around the room right now, you'll notice that things don't have a black outline. So to make something look realistic, eliminating those black lines is going to be a really quick way to get us there. Now, if you've ever colored no lines in the past and you've thought it was a little bit tricky to color, it's because what it's doing is it's relying on your knowledge of light source to create the depth in the objects, rather than having those black outlines. And if you don't yet have that knowledge, that can be a little bit tricky. But in class, I'm going to be teaching you all of that here today. So we take a lot of that guesswork out. Now, whether you're coloring the black lines or the no lines, the way that we approach this is going to be exactly the same. So it shouldn't be any harder to color each version of the image. So I really encourage all of you, even if you're brand new to coloring, to try the no lines version here today. It's really going to help really escalate that realistic look for you. All right, let's go ahead and start on our flower center. I've got my YR21 and I'm just going to pop in and trace each of these little lines. Now, some of these may be hard for you to see here today because I am working in the no lines image, but you can just do your best and even create your own lines as well if you're feeling like it's hard to see them. That's another great thing about working with no lines images is without those black outlines, no one's going to know if you go out of the lines. And I'm just going to dab the ends through here. So in that respect, it can be a lot easier for actually coloring fine detail because we can go out of the lines as much as we need. We can create new lines and no one's going to know. I'm going to swap into my greens. I've got a little bit of YG11 here, and I'm going to just trace the shape in the middle. And a little bit of YG03 just to darken it up. So I'm just going to come around the base. Now through the center, I've got a little bit of E44. And that's going to come along the base of that shape as well, just to give a little bit of depth. Now I've got a little bit of YR23, and I'm just going to use this as a bit of a shadow color around the base of those little circular tops in the center area. Now you can just dab the color. If you're a little bit more advanced, you can trace underneath and create like a bit of a U shape, whatever is most comfortable for you. At this point, we're just aiming to create a little bit of texture, variation, and levels through here. These little details, even though we want them to be photorealistic, are not really noticeable at the end of the piece because we're going to add so much color and detail here that what we're doing at this first point isn't really going to be a focal. From here, I'm going back to my E44 and I'm just doing some little lines between the yellow that we did earlier. So basically working on that space between what you would be seeing underneath. And that just makes the yellow stand out. You can even come underneath some of those tops as well to add a little more depth. Okay, now we're ready to move on to our petals. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to start us off nice and soft to add in all of the detail. Then we can come back and darken it up. Usually when I would do our coloring, I'd start with our darkest color and work down. That's going to always save you the most ink and be the quickest for coloring. In this case, if we were to do that, it's very tempting to use quite a lot of your darkest color and we'd lose that softness in the blend. This is where I think people struggle the most because some people can be really good at holding back the amount of the darkest color, but generally I find that overall people will add too much. And once we add the color, it's really hard to take it away with markers. So we're going to start really soft. I want you to start with RV000. Now that's going to be very hard for you to see on the screen. So I'm going to start with RV00, just so you can see what I'm doing. And all I'm going to do is start with my cast shadows. So I'm just going to pop in and add my shadow underneath any petals that are in front. But to make this easier for you, it means the side of the petal that's going to be closest to the center. Now this does not need to be fine lines because we want a little bit of thickness as we blend. But to make it easy, before we get to any of that work, we're just going to go ahead and do only cast shadows. We're not going to really do any shading just yet. So think about what's in front, what's sitting behind. If you get lost, you can trace around the image as well, or trace around the petal and see what's happening. So I can trace around this one here and I can see I've got a little bit of a lip happening here. So remember the lip itself will have the shadow underneath. So we come underneath on the petal side, on the inside of the petal. And then on this side here, this would be the side that's closest to the center and it's underneath those top layers. So we're just tracing around. Now don't worry if any of these techniques feel a little difficult for you at first. Anything that's new is always going to be tricky. The more we do and go over these techniques, the more classes you do, the more it will start to sink in and make a lot more sense as well. It's like, when you start a new job and it's information overload for the first few weeks. It's just like that. But once you've done it all a few times, you've asked for help, you've gone over technique, it makes a lot more sense and we're able to do our job more efficiently and more effectively. And that will be the same with your coloring as well. So it's normal to feel like a beginner. And I want you to embrace that here today if this is new for you. I want you to come in and around all of that flower center in any remaining white area there. Okay, so we've broken that down into cast shadows. Now we want to add a little bit of detail, so that form shadow. So we're going to look for any little dips in the outline. Always use your outline as a guide for where to place detail. A really good way to explain this is if this petal was just straight the whole way across, just like a big U shape. And imagine that would mean that the whole interior is flat. Now if I take that big U shape and I start to crinkle it and I make like a crease in it, I'll get a little crease like this here. Now we wouldn't have this without something creating that on the interior of the petal. So if I think of that as being pulled in, I can then pull in a fold line to show how that crease would be communicated through the petal. And then we can use that as a bit of a guide for where our detail is going to be placed. So I look at the outline and I try and match up any detail or what's happening with the inside petal. And all of a sudden I have all this movement happening. Now on flowers like this, a lot of the times you'll find the edge of the petal is white to show how it's got like a little lip that's curving around. So we can come along the side edge and apply a little bit of color, but leave that actual edge as white. And that will help you to showcase that raised lip. And all I'm going to do here is I'm just going to follow around and start creating that detail within. Now, a lot of this is going to be subjective. There's no right or wrong way to do this. Nature is always different. So you can take what I'm saying to you and apply this in how you see the petals as well. But we're just looking for little areas of movement, and we're going to use this color to add them in. You can do some of those raised up edges if you like. I always think that nature is one of the best things to learn as a beginner, because it is about being almost perfectly imperfect and creating texture and creating movement. Often we want our coloring to be photorealistic, and we want all the detail to be so well thought out and all of our lines to be perfect. But it takes time and practice to get there. And on nature, we can embrace having a little bit of that texture happening, having a little bit of the movement and imperfection. It makes it a lot easier to build up your marker control, as opposed to doing, say, like a character where you want all the hair strands to be perfectly straight and soft, or an animal where we need the fur to have a little bit of that neatness to convey the expression. Notice up on the edges here, sometimes when I do my shading on this opposite side, I'm leaving that little white edge so I can create that lip on top. And I'm adding this color in first so I can create all this detail and movement, and then use it as a bit of a template and guide for my darker colors. I can come back in later steps to deepen this up. And you won't be able to see what we do with this early layer of light color. So it takes out some of that scary as well. Think about the orientation of your petals. Which petals are popping out towards you, which are extending up? These ones here are actually more vertical, whereas these ones are coming out toward us. So look for the tips of the petals, and remember the tips are going to stay nice and light. And that's my detail all mapped in. Once I've done this, I'm going to pop in and darken up just a very, very small amount. So I've got my RV34. Now I know where my cast shadows are. So I'm going to focus this and what would be the thickest part of my cast shadows. So I'm not applying this everywhere, and I'm not using a lot of this color. Now you can work on a few petals at a time if you like, or you can go through and do all of your petals at once. It's totally up to you. Generally, I will do what I have time to sit and complete. So if you're doing a 10-minute coloring session today, I would do each petal at a time. If you're going to sit for a bit longer, you can go and do the whole thing. We don't really want our ink to dry out. So we want to, if we're going to add the darker color, we want to be able to finish the petals that we're adding it to today. Notice that I'm not applying into the opposite ends. This is always in those very cast shadow areas. So being really selective about where this color is being laid down. Now I'm going to apply this directly over the E44 that we placed in the middle. That's because the E44 was the color between. So that should just leave me with the pops of yellow. And the E44 will serve to darken up this RV34. By darkening it up, I'm really showing that that part is the lowest part of our coloring here. Really create those levels. So really your coloring is just smart placement of dark colors versus light colors to communicate movement, levels, dimension. That's all coloring is. And then we work on essentially diluting down that darker color to get it smooth. Around the back here, I'm not using a lot of this color. Again, keep it to your very shadow areas only. Alright, now once we've used that, I'm going to swap to R81 and we're going to blend out. So remember, blending is diluting. We've laid down darker pigment and now we're coming in with a slightly lighter color to dilute that line down. All we're going to do here is multiple strokes over where the RV34 has ended, and then once that line between those colors has softened, we extend out a little bit of the way. But I'm not extending out very far. Again, we want to make sure that we keep this color in our very shadow area only. That's your key to getting that glow. And the lighter color on the edges is by keeping the color minimal. You can always come back and add more, but it's very hard to take away. So when you're going for that really soft effect, you want to build it up slowly. Oh, if I've got any shadows on the other side coming from that sort of flipped up shape, I'm going to add this in, but I'm not adding my detail shadows to the other side, only focusing cast shadows. The next color is going to be a little bit of RV00. And all we're going to do is we're going to start to extend that even further out. Now, if you do have that detail on the other side, now you can add that in with this color. So we start to create a little bit of extra detail in the petals now. So even though it might be coming on the other side, it's not too much. Still keeping the majority of the petal just as white. And I do find at this stage that the flower can feel a little bit funny, and that's because we're contrasting against the white of the paper, which makes it look a little bit ill-defined. So just keep that in the back of your mind, that it's really important not to judge at the halfway point. We really need to finish this and add more color around, more perspective of what's happening in our scene for our eye to make visual sense of it. This is why at a halfway point, if you've ever done coloring before and you go, I don't think that looks right, but then when you finish it, it comes together. That's because our eye doesn't really make sense when something doesn't look realistic, because we have an idea in our head of what it should look like. And when it's not that, our brain goes, this isn't right, like there's something wrong with this image. So we always have to give ourselves the benefit of the doubt. We have to trust the process. We have to keep going to see how it comes together. And then I've got a little bit of my RV000. And again, we're going to work on just fading that out. And then I like to just do some little strokes. This color is super, super soft, but I'm just doing some little strokes for texture, coming through the center, but with a gap between them. So they're not just covering over everything. The gaps between them help to just convey more of the white. So we keep the contrast between light and shade. And then we just have this really nice fine hint of texture. Now at this point, what you can do is you can go ahead and repeat the colors again if you feel like it needs it. Everyone's is going to be a little bit different. I find at this point, sometimes the colors aren't as nicely blended as I'd like, or not as vibrant as I'd like. So repeating again can really help you build that up. However, if you are going to repeat again, it's important that you don't extend the darker colors any further than we did this round, because then you may lose that soft glow on the edge of the petals. I just want to show you at this point the difference between where we are now and where we're going to finish up, because again, I feel like at this point we kind of look at it and go, I'm not sure if that's kind of sitting right. So that's at the step, and that's when we add everything around it. And can you see how much that transforms when we add the color around? So that's why it's really important to continue on with the lesson. Now, even when you are finished, there is one little extra step you can do that is optional. On my finished piece here, you'll notice that my shadows have this darker pop of brown through them. Now, I've actually used a brown pencil to add this in to give me just a little tiny bit more depth in my very shadow areas. I've used my sepia Prismacolor pencil. You can use any dark brown. And all I've done is I've focused the absolute darkest shadows. And you can see I'm hardly adding any of this in. So it won't turn your image into brown. It's the smallest amount. Now, I've done this before using black in your classes. And you could use black, but it's a little bit harsher with the soft pink. Alternatively, you could even use your markers. So you could even grab your E44 and dab this in. And you can see that will give me the exact same effect here. It's just about being really precise and adding just a touch. So if you are a bit more of an advanced colorist, absolutely just use your marker. And I generally would do this myself, but I know we've got a lot of people who are still learning our fine lines, and this is a little bit of a hack that you can use the other pencils instead. I know there are people online who use pencils over a lot of their markers. And the reason why I don't like to do this is because each medium has its own strengths. We can use it to just do a little bit of detail here and there, like I am at the moment, just enhancing a shadow. But there are people who will draw the whole extent of line work and shadowing over the top. And I feel like this takes away what's special about each medium. This is why in class, I like to show you the strengths of each separately. But we maybe sometimes use a pencil to just enhance what we're already achieving. Personally, the Prismacolor Premier are my favorite pencils. They work really nicely over your markers, and they have a really nice range of both darks and pastels, which the other brands don't necessarily always have. They are artist quality as well, so they are light fast and they won't fade on your markers, which is really important. Okay, and that is your flower all done. Now before we leave the step though, I am just going to color up the little bud off to the side. I'm going to start us off with a little bit of my RB34. Now I'm going to use more of the color on this one just because it's an actual bud rather than the flower. We can have it a little bit richer in color. So I'm going to come around the leaves there, adding in that pink. Cast shadow around each of the little elements. And we're going to blend up with a little bit of my R81. My RV00. And then my RV000. And again, if you feel like you need a little bit more depth, you can absolutely repeat this step as well. And again, let's just remember, this is where we're at now. Our next chapters, we're going to take it to this. By adding in all the surrounding elements, our mind can make a little bit more sense of what that flower is. We don't have as much contrast between the pink and the white of the paper, and we can pull together the rest of the scene. But already we've gone through so many aspects and techniques. We've gone through a lot of light source, a lot of color theory in creating our flower, which is going to help enhance your marker control and understanding of these principles to apply to any image after class. Now, if you get to this point and you feel unsure if you're on the right track and you'd like a little bit of assistance, remember that our classes always come with free one-on-one private tutoring. That's just with me. I'm the only person who works at Kit & Clowder, so it's only me that ever sees your coloring. And I've made every mistake possible. So it's just about helping you with tips to feel more comfortable and confident with your coloring, never about judgment. But make sure that you're not judging your own work as well. We have to trust the process, trust ourselves, trust your class, and we have to keep going in order to see our scene come together. So let's carry on. We'll hop into the next part of the tutorial where we'll start to color up the rest of the image. In this next chapter of the video tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and color up our leaves. Now, whenever I color leaves in our classes, I always try and do a little bit of a different variation, so you've got such a big variety that you can choose from when you come to color your own images. In this one here, we're going to keep the stems brown, and we'll extend that brown through to create a bit of a raised up vein line through here. And then we'll add our greenery in and around those. So to do this, pop this off to the side and grab E11, and we'll start by just drawing in that stem and vein line. So we just come straight up the stem, straight through the middle, and it doesn't need to be super fine. Have a little bit of thickness. It'll make it easier to do your coloring. And then extend out some vein lines on a bit of a diagonal. Now I'm slightly curving these and I'm adding big spaces between them. Come up on the other side and I just slightly offset this. And then I'm going to come out and do that on the connecting ones. All right, now we can go ahead and do this on each of the leaves. Now what we're going to do is we're going to grab our YG67, and this color is going to start along the base of the leaf, and we're just going to draw up beside the E11. Now I'm really going to do a little bit on that straight underneath. Now as we come above this line, I'm going to extend the whole way, come along the middle, and then just a little bit at the top. Okay, so come the whole way and a little bit under the top. Start at the base, then we come the whole way. So it's like we're creating these little sections, and each of these sections is going to blend out toward the tip of the leaf. So we start in the shadow area and we extend our shading back toward that tip. And I'm just going to come onto the other side where we've got those little ridges. I'm just going to apply down the little ridges to create that movement. I'm going to blend that out, so the next color is going to be my YG63. I'm going to come along the opposite side, blend out that shading just toward that tip. And then YG61 through the remaining area. Now, just like when we did our flower, I find that the first round of the blend, it doesn't always look super smooth. So I like to come back in and repeat to build up a little bit more depth. Now, I don't really need to re-add the YG67. That's still pretty nice and dark. So I'm just going to jump straight to the YG63 and add this color for a second time. And then my YG61. Now I'm going to finish off with a little bit of pink variation in the leaves. So I've got here a little bit of E04 and R81, and I'm just going to apply the E04 randomly along the shadow of some of the leaves here. some of the parts of the leaf. I'm going to blend in with my R81. And that gives you a really subtle two-tone effect. And that's how we're going to approach the leaves. I'm just going to repeat this into the rest of the leaves of my scene. So I start with my YG67, come up along the base, and a little bit on that first vein line. Come the whole way above the vein line and a little bit under the next. Then we can extend that shading. Now your strokes don't need to be super fine because you can see here we're working more on shading rather than fine lines. And if you're struggling with this, try moving your page around and having the bulk of the marker fall away from that line. So what I mean is if I move my page, the thickness of my marker, I want to fall where that leaf is. So my tip will be coloring up against that vein line and the thickness will fall inside the leaf. That makes it easier to achieve that finer edge. Next color, YG63, and we're just blending that out. So remember you're blending each section from the bottom up toward the top, toward the tip of the leaf. And then the YG61. Don't forget you can also repeat the blend if you feel it needs it. Starting with either the YG67 or the YG63 like I'm doing here now. You're just applying this where you did the first time around, so we're not extending any further. We're just adding a little bit more pigment on the page, which will help it blend a little bit more smoothly and will give you a little bit more depth. And then YG61. Now we can grab in the E04 and apply just randomly to some of the edges of the leaves. Try and do it randomly, and if you struggle with random, try speeding yourself up when you do it so you've got less time to think it through. That will help it to look a bit more random. We don't really want there to be a formula, otherwise it will look too perfect for nature. And then we grab our R81 and we just soften out into the green to create that soft two-tone finish. Let's do the greenery on the bud. So I've got my YG67 applying into the shadows of each of these. Then through the big one that's facing us, let's just come through the middle. And then there's the two at the back as well. Blending out with YG63. And YG61. And that is the leaves all finished up. All we have left to do is our wood slice. So let's continue on with the next chapter to finish that up. Now, remember, this is your first time trying this technique, and when we try new things, we can often have mistakes in areas we don't love. It's totally normal. Before looking at your work, I want you to do something really important, and that's change your perspective. When we're coloring, we color from about 10 or 20 centimeters away. We color so up close, focusing on every single little detail, every mistake, every single little aspect. But that's not actually how coloring is viewed. Think about whenever you're online, you see someone else's work. Do you sit so close and scrutinize looking for mistakes? No, you look at the whole thing. You appreciate it in entirety, how the techniques have come together. That's what we want to do here as well. So to help you change your perspective, what I would encourage you to do is hop up out of your chair, do some hand stretches, just open and close your hands a few times. Make sure you're not getting any RSI from holding those pencils. Neck gently from side to side, and even do a lap walking around the room just to loosen up. Then when you come back, hold your coloring out at arm's distance or prop it up against the wall and take a few steps back. You're changing that perspective, viewing it as a whole and seeing how it's coming together. Make sure you do those things so you actually get up and do your stretches. It helps so much rather than just holding it back and looking. So when you're looking at your whole piece, remember if there's areas you don't love, instead of saying I've done this wrong or it's not perfect, really don't like when people say that. Try and always avoid it, especially if you're sharing online as well. What I want you to do instead is look at your piece and say, any areas you don't love, think of the lesson here. Next time I'm going to do this to get this result. And see, all of a sudden you change negative into positive into constructive. It's your learning opportunity, and that's exactly what we're here to do today. So experiment, have fun with it. You're doing a great job. I'm really excited to see how you're going. Pop in and share your coloring after this step with us. Pop it in our Facebook group, pop it on Instagram, your blogs, any other group. You're welcome to share any way you like. All I love is that you please just mention that you're learning at Kit and Clowder so others can come and learn with us as well. I love if you mention what class it is. But you are working hard. You are challenging yourself. You're pushing yourself. That deserves to be celebrated. So again, give yourself a big pat on the back. You've done the most important thing to help you grow your coloring here today. Alright, welcome to the last chapter of the video tutorial, and now we're doing the timber. So what we're going to start here today is with a really nice, deep, thick cast shadow around our flower onto the timber round. So we can show that that's really popping forward of that base. So you can see there the darker color the whole way around. Now pop that off to the side. We're going to start with E44. We come in nice and thick under our flower. So add thickness here. We want this to be thicker to show the levels, so no fine lines anymore. Now I'm going to only be applying this where the actual timber round is. I'm not going to come into this bottom section yet. And we're not tracing everything. We're coming under the base and under any little details. You can come under this big leaf here. Now, in over areas like this, where it's kind of still underneath, but we're getting more toward the top end of where that light would be hitting, we pop in sort of in this triangular shape. That way it looks like that's still popping forward, but it's kind of popping up as well. When it's popping up, there's less of a shadow underneath the whole thing at the same thickness. I'm going to do a little bit on this side as well. And then the same thing when we get to the top here. I'm just going to apply a little bit, but I'm keeping it like where these little, where the movement basically is. It's like we're seeing underneath those petals. Now we're going to blend that out. I've got a little bit of E33, and I'm just going to apply straight over what I've just done. Multiple strokes until the line between the colors softens, and then I extend further out. And again, the shading is thick. a little bit of E31. And it's the same thing, we're just blending that out. And then my E30. Now with the E30, I want you to blend that out just like we've been doing. That way you're diluting all that shadow down. It's getting softer the further away it is from the object above. And then once you've done that, we're going to pop in and add this over the rest of that interior of the wood round. And you can see I'm just like circling using the side of the marker. The side of the marker will give you big, broad strokes. So try not to be on the tip doing these little motions. Use the side and get those big, broad motions. Get your big circular strokes happening. You can work quickly to lay that ink down. Once you've done that, I'm going to swap back to my E31 and we're going to create the dimension in the timber pattern. So when you cut through the timber tree trunk, you get like these little round swirls. And you can see I've drawn a few in just to start you off. So I grab my E31 and I'm just sort of tracing these, but I'm holding the marker very softly. I'm just lightly pulling it over the shape. So I want a little bit of movement and texture. Rather than pressing in and drawing, I'm just using my hand to kind of pull it along the page, get a little bit of natural movement happening. And the only thing I want to be doing is making sure that I follow the basic shape and direction around. Sometimes my strokes will be next to each other, sometimes they're going to be further apart. We want that variation to make it look natural. We don't want it all perfectly spaced. Allow the movement. Now we're going to pop in and do the edges. So on the edges, basically what we've got here is we've got the top part of the edge, like where it's right sliced through and you've got a bit of bark around the edge there. Then this bit here is that front face. So we've got front face, top. So two different sides. So you'll notice here around that front face, it gets really dark where those parts join, and you can even see it on my hands there. My light coming from above, the part that's on top is lightest, and then right where we have that side edge, it gets really quite dark. So that's where our darkest color is going to come in, is around that edge. So we can actually do that first. Start with a little bit of E49 and we're just going to trace really roughly around that top edge. So I'm getting a little bit of a natural bump and movement to my strokes here. I don't want it to be just a straight line. Once I've done this, I'm going to go ahead and every time I've got like this little crevice sort of happening, I'm going to extend my strokes pretty much vertically down. And that's going to create like those side edges. So I'm looking for those little dips along the edge to create all those side details, to create the individual sections. From here, I'm going to swap into my E47, and I'm just going to go straight over what I've just done and extend a little further out. Now, as I add this color, I'm just going to do little strokes coming from the top and bottom to create some texture. My strokes are all different lengths, and rather than being lines, I'm going to add thickness to some of them and have some of them thinner. Notice that it's thicker, and I'm adding more color where I want to create like a side edge. Now this is going to look and feel a bit messy until it all kind of comes together at the end, so try not to judge too much at this early stage. Let's just continue on. I've got my E44. I'm kind of dabbing, doing the same thing as I did the other colors, bringing in a bit of random messy texture. I'm just working quickly, and again, not really thinking it through too much. Just dabbing this color and creating these rough, sort of vertical sections of texture. And then my E43. I'm just going to dab this color through. You can even do some dabbing with E42 just so you have variation in the lighter areas. And that should cover all of the white for you. Now I like to come in with the E44 and just really lightly, just kind of like rub my hand over the spaces just to add a little bit of soft texture. Try not to push the marker into the page. I'm just trying to rub the tip of the nib over this. You can always do this with the E43 if you want to keep it a little lighter as well. Once I've done this, I'm going to swap back to my E47. So a little bit lighter for this top section. And I'm just going to just trace along the edge firstly. And again, I'm holding the marker pretty softly and allowing the natural movement of my hand to create this line. It doesn't need to be super fine. And do a cast shadow here under the leaf, and then I've got a little bit of the side there. I've added the darker color to kind of create a side edge. And now we're also going to create crevices like in this part of the timber. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create like a bit of a triangular shape, and it gets thinner on one end and thicker on the other. Now, if your strokes are thicker than mine, it's okay, but I want you to really work on then thickening up where it's joining. So if I just do a really big, thick one, see here, I've got that nice and thick, but I just make sure that this is that triangular shape of the base. And all that's going to do is just look like a deeper cut out into that section. So do these at all different lengths. You can do as many or few as you like. Just try and keep them on the right angle, always going into that center point no matter where they're kind of coming from. They can be a little bit wiggly though. They don't need to be perfectly straight. You can do some really thick ones, some much finer ones. But just always keeping on that same angle coming in toward the middle. And I'm going to grab this color, and what I'm going to do is draw in some detail strokes. I'm going to work with the shape of this part of the timber to draw in like some lines over it. So I'm going to start with some smaller lines, and then I kind of just am creating some interlocking detail. Now there's no right or wrong way to do this. You can trace up, create little tiny circles and trace around them. Now, to help fill in some of the space, I'm going to come back, still with the E47, and just thicken up some areas. So some parts will be thinner, some parts will be thicker. I'm just doing this randomly. Help me get a bit more coverage and a bit more variation. And then my next color is my E44, and I'm just going to basically just come around and blend out some of that detail that I added in. Thickening up some areas I'm leaving. Again, this is just a bit more random because all I'm aiming to do is create a bit of abstract texture so our mind will look at this and understand what it is we're coloring. While we're doing it, it's going to feel a little bit messy, which is absolutely normal. A lot of the time when we color nature, we're abstracting what it looks like. So taking the concept of this is what we know, say the bark looks like, and we just use a series of strokes and color to recreate that texture so our mind understands what it is without it being photorealistic. Sometimes when we work with abstraction, we need to give ourselves a bit of distance to really understand what it is we've colored. When we color so up close that we can lose what that detail kind of is. So holding something back about a meter away, so stepping back from it can help you really see how the technique comes together as a whole as well. And then I'm just continuing to blend a little bit of E43. Not coloring over everything, just continuing that blend. And by leaving out the E49, this top section, it should be a little bit lighter than what you created around the side. If it's not, you probably want to come back into the side and use a bit more of that E49, so that's a little bit darker, so you have that difference between the front and the side edges. And this is my E42. So if you're ever trying to do a technique like this and you go, oh, they kind of look the same, I don't have the depth, and you can't make one lighter, then make one darker. That's what's going to help you get that depth. Now, the only other thing that I did on my original was I grabbed my E44 and I created a few little tiny little lines running vertically through some of this grain. Now, that requires a really soft touch if you're using a marker, so if that's not comfortable for you, I would just use your brown pencil for this step. And you don't want to go overboard. You can see I'm just pulling through a few. Practice first on the side of the page if you're a little nervous as well. And that is our image all finished up here today. You can use that on a card, or it's ready to be framed up and given as a gift or put around the house to celebrate what you've learned and how far you've come with your coloring. Make sure when you assess your coloring today that you give yourself the space to step back from it. Place it against the wall and take a few meters step back, or take a photo and come and look at it a little bit later on. When we're so caught up in the learning and the doing, we can sometimes forget to give ourselves a little bit of distance and we can become a little bit critical. But the whole point of what you've done here today is just to have learnt one new thing or grown upon some skills you've already had. If you've done this, you have improved. So make sure, instead of saying, oh, I struggle with this or I don't like this, make sure you actually look at your piece and point out a few things that you feel you did well. Point out a few things that you feel you learned. And if you don't love something, instead of saying it's wrong, try and say, what can I try next time so I can improve on that? And that way we're taking away the negative and we're focusing just on that learning experience. And this is a really motivating way to continue to improve your work as well, because a lot of the way that we improve and a lot of our motivation comes from our personal mindset. So it's not whether you're good enough or bad enough to do something, it's whether you are appreciating the efforts that you're putting in to continue your growth. And if you have a struggle doing this, please use the free private tutoring that's available for you. I'm right here anytime to run through any tips or techniques to help you feel more confident with your results so you can continue on. Again, never feel nervous to do this. It's exactly what I'm here for, and I would love to help you feel confident with your coloring journey. I hope you'll share your coloring with us, maybe even on email or over on your Facebook group or on Instagram. And I can't wait to see how you go. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the classrooms again soon.